This video is brought to you by my Discord and my Blue Sky. Check the links down in the description below. Sorry, I'm just like double, triple checking everything, but I think...
Hey, what's going on, you guys?
Oh,
My name
God
is
damn
Raptor.
it! Good, stop it! Hey, what's going on, you guys, and welcome back to That's a Wrap. My name is the Raptor, and on today's episode, we're addressing the recent online controversy. That's the clickbait version of the synopsis. But before we get into all of that, let me introduce who we have on the show today. First up, we have Sakinator, aka Sak. He is one of our lovely mods. He was on the very first episode of That's a Wrap as well, and you are back. How are you doing, Sak?
Feeling pretty good, a little nervous. I'm not high for this one, so I hope I'll have a lot easier of a time communicating. Yeah.
I didn't know we were actually going to reveal that. But okay, great.
Yeah, well.
Glad to know you're a little more prepared for this one. Moving on, we have Jolt Scene, aka Jolt. He is one of our lovely event managers and probably one of the biggest That's a Wrap fans I have ever seen. He's always asking me when the next one is coming out. Well, now you have a good idea of when the next one's coming out. How you doing, Jolt?
I was gonna make a joke, but I can't.
Well, wait, why? What's wrong with it?
It's a Wonderwall.
Oh my... This man has not stopped singing Wonderwall for the entirety. We've been in this VC for like over 40 minutes, so that's all he's been doing. Thank you for ending it for the show. I appreciate that. And last but not least, we have That One Gamer, aka Gamer, one of our many, many members, also one of our many thumbnail contest champions. So it's great to have you here as well. How you doing, Gamer?
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here, and I want to give some opinions on these episodes.
Yeah, great. Okay, yeah, I'm sure we all do. There's definitely a lot to say. But yeah, for those of you guys who don't know, I feel like I start every episode with this, but for those of you guys who don't know, this is the podcast that we do on the channel. We've had, I think, 5 episodes of this before. But now that Death Battle is back in full swing, there are some things that are going to be changing. Starting in 2025, my plan for this series is to basically release it monthly, just like Death Battle does, and just review the most recent episode of Death Battle with some other people, you know, in podcast form. And that'll take up, I don't know, like maybe 75-80% of the episode, and then for the rest of it, we just talk about whatever we want, because I don't want it to just be Death Battle reviews, you know, that'll probably just get boring after a while, so kind of want to mix it up. However, for right now in 2024, because Death Battle is releasing episodes every 3 weeks, I kind of feel like that's a little too much, a little too frequent for this series, so that's why today we are going to be reviewing both Omni-Man vs. Bardock and Joker vs. Giorno, and the next episode will be reviewing both Bowser vs. Eggman, and whatever the episode after Bowser vs. Eggman ends up being. And yeah, this is just going to be a very fun discussion, nothing too hardcore, nothing too serious. We're just 4 guys giving our opinions about some Death Battle episodes, and of course, you guys listening in can leave your opinions in the comments below. So I think that's basically everything to say. You guys feeling good?
Pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, lots of stuff to say. Again, addressing the online controversy is really the best way to describe this. Let's talk about Omni-Man versus Bardock. So again, this was Death Battle's big reveal at their event that they put on, you know, their grand return. So I think before we start going into specific details, I just want to ask what you guys thought about this episode overall. So Sak, let's start with you. Overall, how did you find Omni-Man versus Bardock?
Well, for starters, I feel like bringing Omni-Man back was a very questionable decision. Not in a bad way, but we just haven't seen a combatant come back like that since... I want to say...
We've had quick combatant returns before, yeah. Like, I know Captain Marvel came back really quickly after her first time. Batman, I think... Well, no, Leonardo holds the record for quickest because...
I saw the short today.
Yeah, because
I remember that short.
Yeah, right, from one of the recent episodes of the show, yeah. Yeah, no, technically it's Leonardo, but Batman, I think, holds, like, the second place record because it's, like, 13... At least from an episode basis, because it's, like, 13 episodes apart. But yeah, especially nowadays, while they do have a lot of returning combatants, usually it's not nearly this quick because they've kind of expanded their horizons a bit more, and there are other invincible matchups that people want to see. So I definitely understand that. Yeah, it raises some eyebrows for sure.
Oh, definitely. But I feel like it was done more in the better favor because not only is Omni-Man such a wildly popular character, he's gotten so much content, especially with season 2 of the new Invincible show, that I feel like bringing him back was not only justified, but a really good marketing decision because, I mean, we saw how popular Omni-Man versus Homelander was. It's sitting at, I think, maybe 11 million views as we speak.
Yeah, something like that.
So just having him back not only so soon, but also just in full glory, like character arc, more development. It's just, it was really cool to see, and especially against the opponent that everyone wanted before Omni-Man versus Homelander was revealed.
Yeah, that was certainly the one I wanted to see Omni-Man fight. But then I was thinking, you know, after Omni-Man versus Homelander came out, I was thinking like, yeah, I wanted Omni-Man versus Bardock from the get-go, but I'm not even sure if that would have been as good of an episode because there's just so much personality that Omni-Man versus Homelander had that Omni-Man versus Bardock just would not have in the same way. But of course, that's not totally fair to say because Omni-Man versus Bardock has some advantages, some obvious advantages that Omni-Man versus Homelander doesn't. And that we definitely got to see some of that in this episode, which again, we'll talk about a little more later. But yeah, great to hear. Joel, how about you? What were your like initial impressions of this episode?
For starters, like I do think that this episode was a good start to bring Death Battle back.
Okay.
And I do agree with like it was weird to see Omni-Man back like really fast. So like he's like one of the most popular characters ever known as of right now.
Currently he's very popular. Yeah.
As for the episode, I think it was a good way to start off Death Battle. The only complaint I really have of it is just I think the backgrounds kind of look ugly, but
okay.
But besides that, like I think it was pretty good.
Fair enough. Okay, Gamer, how about you? Do you agree, disagree? What were your initial thoughts for this one?
I remember seeing the initial video. I was really surprised, like same, that Omni-Man came back this quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was wondering what episode they would premiere with, and I was actually predicting Bowser's Eggman being one of the first ones. Omni-Man vs. Bardock was not there. I did like the episode. I enjoyed it. I'll say the only thing that really bothered me was Omni-Man's 3D model. It looked odd.
Yeah.
I can't really like my finger on it.
I'm not gonna lie, that's actually something I was gonna bring up. I guess just to give my own general opinions, I do think the animation was well done. I think they used escalation very well, and I like how the fight got more and more intense. You know, that's always a good way to keep viewers on their toes and keep them interesting. I did really enjoy the voice acting. I think both voice actors did really well as their characters. I know Tom Shulk, or Shulk, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but he came back as Omni-Man from Omni-Man versus Homelander, and I think he did just as good a job, if not an even better job in this Death Battle, so I think that was great. And the actor for Bardock, his name is escaping me at the moment, but he did very well as well. I do think the death could have been a little better, personally, because it kind of just ended with Bardock's arm exploding, and then that just leads to his death. Death Battle has been trying to make a lot of their deaths more respectful to the characters being killed, and I think that's great, but I do think that a respectful death is not always the most appropriate necessarily. Like, I think there is still a place for the bloody violence, and of course when you have an Invincible episode, that definitely applies there. So I am happy that they felt the need to go a little bloodier with this one, but I do think the death could have been executed a little better. I think it just could have been more visually appealing. And I was gonna say that Omni-Man's 3D model does kind of just look like an action figure sometimes that's just being animated around, whereas Bardock, I think, looks as good as the other 3D Dragon Ball models that we've gotten on the show. But Omni-Man, I do think looked a little strange, especially that one shot where he's like flying, like it's either like through the energy blast or near the energy blast. Like, he just looks like a posable action figure while he's flying, which again is not the best, but I still think for what Devil Artemis had to work with, I think he did it very well.
I actually have to disagree with the death feeling a little off. I actually thought it was a really good one. It wasn't what I was expecting, because given how brutal both Dragon Ball and Invincible are as series, I thought there was going to be a lot more bloodshed. Like, I thought one of the characters was going to be ripped in half, have their head cut off or whatever. But I feel like the somber tone of the death is what really made it for me, because, you know, with Omni-Man versus Homelander, you had a very, you know, brutal, like, Homelander gets his jaw ripped off and then his heart ripped out, his head crushed. Like,
yeah,
it was very fitting, especially for the theme of the matchup. But with Bardock versus Omni-Man going into the redemption side of both characters, I feel like the somber death was a lot more fitting. You know, Omni-Man wouldn't really feel as good about killing Bardock, or Bardock wouldn't feel as good about killing Omni-Man. And I think especially the last scene of it, with the silent hum of the star as Bardock is falling towards it, and just the music completely going out, I think really just made a great death.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I think the ending of it is executed very well, especially with the last line, you know, like, remember that you said Saiyan. And then again, you know, like, it kind of just gets quieter and quieter with the star. It's very eerie. And then, of course, Omni-Man with the fuck at the end, he's like, I didn't want to do this. Like, I wanted to stop because, you know, he's been killing his whole life, and in the comics, you know, he kind of wants to move away from that, but he still finds himself killing. So I definitely think that all works great. And I'm not saying I needed, like, Bardock to be ripped in half or Omni-Man Hell to be ripped in half. I didn't need that necessarily. And I do appreciate that they did go bloodier, at least to some degree. I just think maybe they could have gone a little further, because I think most people will agree that just getting your arm exploded is not really the most entertaining way to die. Like, I just think they could have gotten a little more creative with that. But in terms of what they were going for in terms of the tone, yes, I think that was all handled well.
I do like the storyboard version more because apparently, like, I heard like in the beginning, Bardock crushes bugs, and that's why he says, "Great, another gross bug."
That makes sense.
I think for budgetary reasons, they probably like had to take that out, given the whole rooster teeth exploding.
I also looked at the storyboards and also noticed, like, right before Bardock turns into the Ape, his arm was supposed to get, like, really fucked up when Omni-Man stepped on it.
Yep.
I'm guessing, like, they couldn't, like, model it in time because, you know, budgetary restrictions.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, these 4 episodes that are coming out in 2024, they were starting to work on them before they even knew Rooster Teeth was getting canned. So, yeah, it's like when they eventually go back to work on them, there are going to have to be some things that are cut. And that of course, ties into the fact that we really don't see any Whiz and Boomstick as of right now, the animated segments, which some people won't consider that much of a loss. Personally, I think it's one of the better decisions as a way to save money. Because I think, as funny as they can be sometimes, I do think that is one of the more expendable aspects of Death Battle, because they were making it work long before they were even doing these animated gags. And I know some people, when they were watching Omni-Man vs. Bardock, they didn't even notice that the Whiz and Boomstick scenes were gone. I didn't notice, I think, until after I was finished watching it and I was, you know, reviewing it briefly at the end of my reaction video. So yeah, like, I do think that is one of the smarter ways to save money in that way. But yeah, I think that's all really good stuff to talk about for the animation. How about the analyses? Not necessarily the conclusion, we'll get to that, but in terms of like just the general writing and the analyses, what did you guys think of that?
I think they both represented, like, both characters, like, very well.
Okay.
And they got into more, like, detailed Invincible stuff more than they did with Homelander, which makes sense because you kind of like want to make it sound like it's closer than you think, but even though it really isn't.
Yeah.
But with this one, it's actually like there is a debate to be had. And as for the post-analysis, at first I didn't really agree with the outcome. I thought Bardock was going to sweep, but after, like, watching it before the show, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can understand why they went to this conclusion of Omni-Man beating Bardock, because, you know, even if we add in the Saiyan form, even despite it being, like, not in the original canon, it drains energy and stamina, and Omni-Man is, like, more durable and stronger to, like, to just wait that out, pretty much.
Well, I guess before we get to the conclusion necessarily for everyone, do you agree with the idea to use the Super Saiyan form in the first place?
I'm not too familiar with, like, what's canon in Dragon Ball and all that, but like, from what I have heard, I think it's valid. It's valid.
It's the kind of thing where it's like, it's a what if thing, but it's also like an example of what could happen in canon. Like, it's not like that, like, it's not like he gained an extra power source in this what if, like, episode Bardock or whatever. But at the same time, again, in canon, we didn't actually see him use it, so there is definitely a debate to be had. Obviously, since Omni-Man won, that probably made Death Battle feel a little better about including it, because it meant, you know, you could use all the stuff that he has without, you know, actually necessarily changing the verdict. So from that perspective, I think, yeah, like, it was fair for them to use it, but I do understand if some people are like, well, you can't just, like, pluck out this what if story, like, and they did have that big speech about Bardock at the end where it's like, maybe, you know, he was right there before, you know, Frieza got rid of him. And I do think that was a very well-written speech. I think the analyses in general were very well-written. I'll get into that in a sec, but there is definitely an argument you can make for it. And they did say very early on that they're basically, like, including everything for Bardock that's not, like, Xeno or Heroes or whatever, which of course includes episode Bardock. So I think I don't really hate the choice, but I'm not upset with people who wish that it just wasn't really a factor. And again, because of the conclusion they came to, it didn't really matter anyway, at least not in their eyes. But Zach, how about you? What did you think about the general analyses for this episode?
I think Omni-Man's analysis was done a lot better here than in Omni-Man vs. Homelander, and you could argue that's because they did go more into his character, but I just thought the editing was better. I thought the explanation for the stuff they can do was better. And I think Bardock's analysis holds the candle for probably one of the most unique analysis in the series, because while watching it, I didn't really get the impression that, you know, they were just scaling Bardock alone, but they were also, like, scaling what the average Saiyan could do at the time.
For sure.
Like,
Yeah.
that's why they scaled him to Goku's traveling across space feet. That's why they went into all-around generalized discussions of Saiyans rather than Bardock himself. And I think that works better a lot in the episode's favor, especially considering the fact that, from my understanding, Bardock doesn't have as much to work with as the other Saiyans like Goku, Vegeta, even Piccolo, in terms of, like, well, Piccolo's not a Saiyan, but you get it. As for whether or not I agree with Bardock being given Super Saiyan, I do agree, but only because I think it not only makes sense in canon, like, say, you know, oh, Omni-Man and Bardock were to actually fight. I don't think it's too out of the question to give Bardock Super Saiyan.
That he could reach it realistically, kind of thing.
Especially with, like, the logic that Death Battle gave, that Omni-Man would definitely push Bardock to that point, being more experienced, more durable, smart atoms, Sundisk, the whole hoopla.
And there's no reason to believe that he couldn't reach that point of the Super Saiyan if he's fighting someone that would push him to that. Yeah, that's definitely a valid interpretation for that. Absolutely. Gamer, how about you? What do you think about the general analysis, writing, etc.?
I love the editing. Like, the editing blew me away during Omni-Man's analysis. I think all the visual effects they used for the analysis looked really good, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think it was really engaging, and it went way deeper into his, like, actual stats and feats than Omni-Man vs. Homelander, obviously. So I enjoyed this, like, a much more than the previous one, because not only did that, I think it also went further into, like, Omni-Man's story, which was, like, really interesting to me, because I've yet to watch Invincible. I want to, though, eventually.
Yeah, I agree with what a lot of you guys are saying. There's a lot of great editing in this episode. I think both DJ and Max really brought the heat with this one. Like, even just from, like, the first minute of Omni-Man's analysis, like, the editing goes hard, and you can tell. That's definitely something that's one of the best aspects of this episode, honestly, if you ask me. I do think the analyses in general were well written. I think this episode, personally, did the best job it could of expanding on the analysis for Omni-Man, you know, when compared to Omni-Man vs. Homelander, but also trying to stay as far away from spoilers as possible. Because yes, they did have to spoil some things. You kind of have to, especially when it's a much harder debate in this case. But I do think that they hid as much stuff as they could as well. I really do think they found that balance, which is awesome. And the analyses really had me thinking that Bardock was going to win. Like, after both of the analyses, I was like, okay, I'm even more confident that Bardock has this, and then he kind of didn't. He kind of died. So that really got me. And I think that's a good thing in some cases, where it's hard to predict where the outcome is going to go, despite the fact that they're still telling you a lot of good information. I do think some of the Sundisk stuff definitely came out of nowhere. Like, they brought it up under, like, one sentence, and then they very much moved on from it. So I was like, oh, they're just dismissing it. They're not really gonna talk about it, because that was a feat that I knew about even before this episode came out, and I was like, oh, they're probably not going to include it. That's what I said in my prediction. And then the reaction, I'm thinking, oh, they're probably not going to include it. And then they included it. So that was very wrong. But yeah, no, I do think, again, especially the stuff about Bardock at the very end, like talking about, you know, if he could reach the Super Saiyan form, again, while some people may not agree with that kind of analysis, I think that's pretty well written. I very much enjoyed that kind of writing. So I do think they were respectful to both characters, and yes, Zach, I definitely agree with your point on talking about just Saiyans and power levels as a whole, because you have to understand that while a certain value of a power level may not equate to a specific value of tons of TNT or something, you should still be able to say a character with this power level is going to be about the same as a character with this power level. And they weren't even referring to King Vegeta, but also Goku. And again, like him like dodging those asteroids or whatever. So yeah, I think that was definitely a great way to look at things, and I appreciated that a lot. Now let's talk about the outcome. Jolt, you kind of already spoke about the outcome and why you think it makes sense. Sack, how about you? Do you agree with this episode of Death Battle? Because I know you're one of the biggest Omni stans that I know, so I'm curious what you think about it.
Okay.
Yeah?
I know people are probably going to be heated by this, but I agree with the result.
Okay, why is that?
It's mostly to do with the fact that Omni-Man is over 2,000 years old. I don't really think it's out of the question that he would not only know how to deal with somebody like Bardock, but given the points that, you made earlier with like his stamina and his strength just being too much to overwhelm Bardock's stronger forms, which take more stamina and power out of him. And another thing I feel like they executed really well in the animation.
Okay.
But I just think Omni-Man has the experience, the durability, and just all around like raw power to do Bardock in. And especially with Bardock's stronger forms, like I said, draining his power, I don't think that's exactly ideal for staying against somebody who can float in space for, days.
Oh yeah, no, the experience and stamina, no matter how you slice it, like, that's Omni-Man for sure. Gamer, how about you? You're the only, well, I guess I'll talk about my opinion about it afterwards, but Gamer, what do you think? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree?
Honestly, I do agree. I agree with the verdict.
Okay. Any particular reason why that hasn't been said yet, or is it just what the other guys said, more or less?
More or less, it's basically the same thing. It's like, in this what-if scenario where Bardock gets Super Saiyan, it would be the first time he would get Super Saiyan, right?
Yes, correct.
I feel like with that, fighting someone like Omni-Man, who has smart atoms and has like been in space for weeks without needing to breathe, he would drain that pool of ki like really quickly, and there would be a disadvantage to him at that point.
I understand, for sure, yeah. And here's kind of, I guess this transition's easy to my opinion on the outcome. So the first thing I want to say is that based on how Death Battle analyzed the fight and the calculations they made, what they decided to include, not include, then yes, what Death Battle said makes perfect sense, because if Bardock only holds the speed and versatility advantage, then again with that strength and durability, the experience and the stamina, and again with Bardock's lack of experience using Super Saiyan, etc., then yes, it makes perfect sense that Omni-Man is more suited to win a fight like this. A lot of people are upset though, particularly because they think that the whole sun disk scaling or sun disk material is an outlier. They think that just because it's built on a statement, it doesn't make sense. I'm going to try to explain why I think it does make sense, and why I do agree with the outcome, generally speaking. I do think there are some things they could have explained better, because the way that it is explained, I can totally understand why some people would be like, well, hang on, like, just one sentence about how this spaceship cannot destroy a Viltrumite, but we see it destroy this thing, like, I can understand how some people would be like, well, that doesn't seem very fair to use. Well, for one thing, it's not just a single statement about that. It is a very well-established plot point in Invincible that the Coalition of Planets do not have any weapons that can hurt Viltrumites. It is something that is brought up over and over and over again. It is something where the story literally breaks if the Coalition of Planets can hurt Viltrumites, because a big plot point is trying to get a weapon that can hurt one. So it's more than just a simple sentence that's saying that that's how it works. But even more so than that, and this is something that Death Battle did bring up in one of their black boxes in the right corner that I noticed, but again, I kind of prefer that they would have said this out loud, because I think it would have just halted a lot of people right then and there, that Conquest, another Viltrumite, was capable of destroying the ship that destroyed the sun disk, despite the ship being able to withstand its own firepower. So that in and of itself, I think, is a very strong argument for that scaling being valid. But it wasn't said out loud, and as such, a lot of people didn't pick up on that. And again, if they're a really big Dragon Ball fan, and this is where they're getting most of their Invincible information, then yeah, the way it's described, I can see some people thinking that that's not fair scaling to use. And that's probably my biggest complaint with the episode, that I think they needed to explain some things a little better. Because in my prediction, I knew about the Sun Disk feat, but I thought I had enough context to know that that wasn't fair to use. But then after the death battle came out, it turns out, oh wait, there is actually some context that say that it can be used. And then you have other supporting evidence, like the fact that the Infinity Ray is something that's capable of hurting a Viltrumite, and it can do things that are way more powerful than just destroying a Sun Disk, like it can cause supernovas. And there's more that Death Battle talks about in their follow-up Death Battle cast, and I do think some of the arguments are a little flimsy. Like, they try to say that because the Infinity Ray was only able to blow a hole through Viltrum, and when it's usually able to cause supernovas, then that must be a very strong planet in that case, because if that's all it's able to do, and all it's able to do is provide a hole for the Viltrumites to fly through, just scaling Nolan to planet level probably doesn't even make sense, which again, I think is a little more flimsy, but when you combine that with all the other arguments, then yeah, I do agree that it is viable to put Omni-Man at that higher level. And I do think, not to call anyone out, but I do think there are some people that don't like that that feat is included just because they don't like that it put Omni-Man at that super high level. I think the calculations are perfectly fine, but again, more people will be upset at the fact that they even included it at all. But I personally think that it was fair to include. I feel like I just rambled so much about that, but does that make sense to you guys? Am I making sense in that regard?
No.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, I completely understand.
I think they analyzed Bardock very well. I don't think anyone has an issue with how they analyzed him, except for maybe including the Super Saiyan form, but we kind of already talked about that. But yeah, again, it's not the calculations I think that people have an issue with, it's just the fact that they included it. And again, yeah, some people just might be a little ignorant about that, or some people, again, I really thought we were past the point of people disregarding feats because they don't like them, but maybe we're not, because I do think there are some people that just really didn't like that it was included because it allowed, quote-unquote, Omni-Man to win. And I think some people were skeptical about it because it's just not something that was talked about a lot in the general community first. And I think some people have this mentality of, well, if it wasn't something that I heard before the Death Battle came out, then that must mean that Death Battle is wrong. Even though it is totally possible for Death Battle to just find something super legitimate that no one has really considered before. And if you're not going into these episodes with an open mind, then maybe just don't watch the analyses. Like, there's not really a point.
Just watch the animation and just get mad.
Yeah, exactly. Like, just see who wins, and if you're not gonna listen to the outcome at all, then just leave. Like, don't waste your own time. Just be stubborn on your own.
Or like get mad because that character didn't kill that character in one punch.
Exactly.
Like one of the biggest details in like Deku versus Asta, because people were mad that in the animation, like Asta hits Deku but he doesn't die.
Oh no, they made a 3-minute long animation. They totally shouldn't have done all that work. Like, what the hell are you trying to say?
How dare they have fun?
Yeah, exactly.
Blood escalation in knife fight?
Hell no. No. Get that out of here. And the only other thing I want to say about this episode, I think, before we move on to Joker versus Giorno, is I love the track so much, man. I love it. It's so good.
Yeah. It really helps it feel like a sequel to Omni-Man versus Homelander, which I really like.
Like, I've said this before, but like I think like in this Diabolical Me, it was like the setup for this song.
Yeah, you almost got the title right. It's Diabolical Invincible Me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I do think that this is different from that track in appropriate ways. I love Diabolical Invincible Me as well for what it is, but I do have to admit, like, I find myself wanting to listen to Solid State Invincible a lot more. I think, again, just because it's more upbeat. I don't want to say it's more intense, because Diabolical Invincible Me is very intense, but there's a higher degree of energy to it, I think. There's definitely a recency bias aspect of it, but, like, I just love the track.
I mean, I feel like that recency bias is there for a reason, too, because it just goes to show how much Brandon is able to improve on his craft with each and every episode.
Absolutely. Like, everyone, like, Brandon Thairwolf, like, everyone is just getting better and better. And even, like, for season 10, like, I've listened to, like, basically every single track for that season on their own multiple times. Like, I don't think there's a single other season that I can say that for. I listen to Jailhouse Rocket all the time, no particular reason. I listen to God's Hand all the time. I listen to Super, of course. Super is like, I play that shit before I go to bed. But that's like caffeine to me, though, so that's probably not a good idea. But
big adrenaline rush.
yeah, exactly.
Outro song.
But yeah, I think that's good for Omni-Man versus Bardock. If you guys are good, we can move on to Joker versus Giorno. Jolt, how about we start with you for this one? Because I know you're a very, very big Persona fan. You probably have a lot to say. But again, just starting with the general vibes of this episode, maybe talking about the animation a little bit. What'd you think?
Oh, I have a lot to say. Persona is like one of my favorite franchises of all time. Like it was there throughout like the end of my middle school era and then throughout the entirety of my high school era. So it's a franchise that means so much to me.
Yeah.
I love Persona 5. Like it's been like one of my favorite games of all time since like the 9th grade. And as for JoJo, like it was just a show that I watched because friends wouldn't shut up about it. So I just like, okay, I want to contribute to the
I think that's how
conversation.
most people get into JoJo's. Oh, a friend berated me into watching it.
Yeah, and I have had a mixed opinion history on JoJo. It's either right now it's just like there are parts I love and then there are parts I hate. Part 5 I do love. I think it's like my favorite part.
Really?
And
Okay.
I did love Giorno. I waited for this episode for 5 years. I've been a fan of this matchup ever since like the Sky to GM like thing that he did.
Would you say that this was like your most wanted episode before it came out, or like maybe not quite that high?
As of like modern day before it came out, it was like my second most wanted, behind Sackboy versus Maxwell.
Okay. Okay.
And I was so happy when it was like when I heard it was like announced at the like event in Texas, and I was just like, oh please don't nobody be lying to me. And then I saw it and I'm like, oh yes.
Yeah, I tried so hard to avoid, because people I know were talking about like all the stuff. I think the only thing I actually did find out for like the Texas reveals was the fact that Master Chief versus Doomslayer was going to be the rematch episode. But in terms of the outcome for Omni-Man versus Bardock and the next time, I tried to avoid that like it was the fucking plague. And thankfully I did. It would have sucked to have seen just Joker versus Giorno after having already known about it, because my reaction was like, oh shit, here we go.
Do you remember that? Was that a restaurant?
Yeah. Yeah, so that was great. But but you enjoyed the episode at least. Like, you enjoyed it?
Oh, I love everything about it. Like, it pretty much exceeded my expectations. Like, I was legit crying during this the whole battle. It was like a little predictable. Like, okay, yeah, Gold Experience Requiem came out. Okay, Joker wins.
Yeah, because
Cool.
no Satin Isle yet. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the Satin Isle comes out, and I'm like, yes! Like, it was so freaking hype.
Right.
Like, to sum up this whole episode, I waited 5 years for this. It was it would have been worth the 10-year wait.
Damn, well, that's high praise. I'm happy you enjoyed it that much, because it's great when people who are waiting so long for something get exactly what they want out of it. Like, that's for me, for Stitch versus Rocket. I'm like, yeah, like, I loved it so much, and I'm so happy that, you know, I didn't have to wait longer for it. Even though I felt like I was waiting a long time, I am happy to have finally seen that, and I can go back and rewatch that whenever I want. And now you can go back and rewatch Joker versus Giorno whenever you want and enjoy it. So I think that's amazing. I'm really happy that you feel that way.
I'm like obsessed with it. Like, I watch it on a daily basis. I wouldn't even care who won. Like, I thought like Joker was gonna win. Like, I like saw no reason how Giorno was gonna win personally. But like, I didn't care if like Death Battle just made Giorno win. Like, I was gonna love the episode no matter what.
Okay, awesome. Really happy to hear that. Sack, how about you? General thoughts about the episode, the fight? What'd you think? You got nothing to say?
Okay, no, for real. It's so jarring to have Jolt, who loves both series, and then to go to me, who knows absolutely nothing about both series.
But what'd you think of the episode? How was the production?
I could try to wrangle up my thoughts the best I can. So, I'm sure if I actually knew about both characters before the episode, I would have been a lot more engaged into it.
Yeah.
But for what it was, I can see 100% why people love it. Like, the animation, while looking a little bit janky at times, I thought was great. I thought the custom sprites look amazing. I thought the background was really cool. I thought the powers, while I didn't understand them, were very visually appealing. And the track, especially the track, sounds something that would come out of both series, which again I don't know anything about, but I have listened to a few other death battle tracks referencing JoJo's. I've listened to one Persona song. I think it's the one from Persona 4. I think it's called Time to Make History.
Okay, looks like Jolt's
Yeah,
confirming.
that one.
Looks like Jolt's confirming that's right. Yeah, okay.
I love that one. But yeah, I see why people like this episode. It's just I'm not too engaged in Persona or JoJo, so I won't have the same hype factor that other people do. But seeing Jolt's happiness, I can say for sure it's probably a really good episode. It is a good episode, but like you get what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no. The people who wanted stuff out of it got what they wanted out of it. And that's absolutely true because it is a very visually appealing episode, and that's part of the reason why people love the characters and they love the series. It's one of the big appeals of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Persona. So yeah, for sure, even people who don't know that much about the characters, like there's always something to enjoy for Death Battle because they do really try to take advantage of like what makes the series good and make them stand out. And I think that Persona and JoJo's it works very well together, and I think they understood how to roll with that. Gamer, how about you? What'd you think about it?
I love the episode personally.
Okay.
Like, I didn't know like barely anything about either character. I knew about them, but I didn't know about their powers or in terms of verses how powerful they were.
Mm-hmm.
The fight was genuinely it blew me away because I saw the preview and it was a sprite fight and I was like, okay, it's going to be pretty good, but I didn't have any expectations for it.
Sure.
I loved how both their powers bounced off each other. I was smiling the whole way through. I loved it.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, I have a lot of very similar things to say. I very, very much enjoyed the episode. The animation was a ton of fun. I agree with Zach that the sprites looked very, very good. I think throughout the whole episode, the use of stylization is one of the best I have seen for this episode. Like, they really knew what they were doing with Persona and JoJo's. Again, making like a very seamless mesh of those two series and, their tropes and, the stylization. So, and that was a big draw for this episode. It really feels like, kind of like what Jolt was saying, that this was the Joker versus Giorno experience that we were waiting for. There really weren't too many aspects of the presentation that slacked here, which was great. And in terms of, utilizing the characters, I do think, they used as much variety as what was probably possible, because especially for someone like Joker, you can throw like 100 different things and, there would still be stuff left over. But if I do have some complaints about the fight or anything, I do think it was a bit short, but again, I don't really want to talk about that too much because, again, I'm sure they did the best with what they could. The budget cuts can kind of explain a lot of things, or maybe you guys didn't even find it that short, but personally, I think maybe it could have been a bit longer with a bit more things, but with what we got, I still think it was great.
I do find it funny that Jack Frost was the one that gets Giorno to use gold experience REQUIEM out of all personas he could have used.
I have a comment on that. I found out later that something didn't include in the analysis is that Giorno can't use his powers on anything that's sub-zero temperatures. So Jack Frost is actually going to counter him.
I know, and that's what was funny. Jack Frost, out of all personas that he had that were like stronger, Jack Frost, the Atlas.
That's why he's the GOAT.
That's pretty funny. No, but that does kind of work though. It's a really nice detail. And yeah. Any other things I could say? One of my friends actually, who is big into JoJo's, he did say that he thought that Giorno was a bit out of character just because he felt that Giorno more so felt just like a persona boss rather than like the righteous protagonist, which is a trait that all JoJo's characters are more or less supposed to share. I don't know if anyone agrees with that, but I do kind of understand that to a degree.
I do kind of a little bit disagree with that.
Okay.
Since like how the fight starts, it's like, oh, this is a threat to my dream.
Yeah.
Like this person's trying to take my dream. Yeah, and I feel like he would basically act like that to somebody who is like a threat to that.
Okay, fair enough. I just want to bring up the characterization because I know that's something that can really push some people's buttons. So I wanted to just ask you guys if you agreed or if you noticed anything like that.
I do understand it, but like I think in this context it makes sense given that Giorno has acted like this before.
Okay.
With similar people.
Sure.
Similar
Okay.
threats.
Great. And if anything else, I do think maybe Return to Zero, the ability could have been used a little more creatively because the vast majority of the time it's just, oh, look at what's not working. I think maybe they could have done some more visually entertaining stuff with that, or if anything more so than just, oh, gun doesn't work, gun doesn't work, gun doesn't work. Like maybe they could have shown some other things that were getting like nullified. You know, I just think maybe they could have been a little more creative there. But again, these are mostly nitpicks. Like I think the animation was done very well. And now I guess we can move on to the analyses. Jolt, we can go back to you. Is there anything in particular you wanted to say about how they looked at anything, or how they presented stuff in the writing, anything like that?
I do love how they, like, the way they describe these two characters and how they both have like these broken abilities. So like while if you don't know who's gonna win, like you're going in with the mindset that like, oh my gosh, wait, this character has this, but wait, this character has this. Like how is, like, okay, so Joker has Almighty Attack, but like he also has Return to Zero. Is it gonna work on Return to Zero, or is Return to Zero gonna work on the Almighty? Yeah. But as for like their series and them as characters, I think they did amazing.
Okay.
And I do love the background music on both of them. I pretty much like how they like go on about their stories. I was like, okay, I'm curious, how are they gonna like mention like the different personas Joker uses? They did the gods and deities and all that, but like they just mentioned the stuff that matters, which I'm not complaining. And as for Giorno, they were like painting Gold Experience Requiem as one of the most broken things in anime, because that's like
kind of is.
Yeah. Like I said, it kept the tone that like both of these characters have like broken abilities.
The grandiose power, like unbeatable kind of character. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it like made it more interesting. Like it leaves viewers at the end of their seat like, okay, wait, so this character has this character has that. Oh, okay, this is actually tough. I'm actually
this brings me back to days where I was reacting to death battles without necessarily predicting them beforehand, because there were some characters where it's like I go into it not really knowing anything about the characters and I have to just rely on what death battle is saying, and I can't even imagine what I would be feeling if I knew nothing about these characters beforehand. Like if I was learning about the almighty attacks and Return to Zero and the infinite death loop, like if I was learning about all of that for the first time in one sitting, like I do think Death Battle did a good job of putting so much information into just a small amount of time, but I have no idea how I would have responded to that. Just thinking like, what the hell are these characters? How can they be written like this? Stuff like that, you know? I guess, Gamer, did you have any strong opinion? I feel like Jolt's going to have the strongest opinion on the analyses. Zach, we already kind of heard your thoughts. Gamer, do you have anything major to say about the writing or general analyses?
I really love the analyses, and I think the Joker analysis has single-handedly made me want to play Persona 5 now.
That's great.
I really want to get the game this December and just play it during my winter vacation, because it generally sounds really fun and interesting to just go through and play. I want to compare this analysis to like Bardock versus Omni-Man for a second.
Sure.
It contrasts in a way that Bardock vs. Omni-Man focused more on like just statistics, like it's like stats, like how fast one is, how like their durability, their stamina, their strength. And in Joker vs. Giorno, I feel like it goes more into what their pure abilities are and like what their descriptions. Like, oh, Sinful Shell can go through anything, but GER can return anything to zero.
Yeah.
So there's more emphasis on that.
Yeah, for sure. Because stats, not that stats are irrelevant, but it's a lot messier, and they needed to go through some more hoops in order to kind of explain things properly. And I definitely think they took the right direction in doing so, because trying to focus too much on like how much Giorno can output, like that would have just been distracting from what was actually important, you know? And yeah, there might be some people who would genuinely be curious about that, but that's just not where the debate is. So I do think the direction they went with that writing was appropriate. And yeah, like I said, they need to fit a lot of information into a small amount of time. This is another thing where I think maybe the episode could have been a little longer, because I think that could have benefited the analyses a bit as well, because I think this episode isn't even 18 minutes long. It is one of the shorter episodes, and again, I don't want to give them too much crap for this, because who knows why this was the case. It could just be budget stuff, and if that's the case, I really can't blame them at all, because they're doing the best that they can, and Death Battle is better than no Death Battle. But I do think maybe there could have been some more in-depth stuff they could have talked about if they really wanted to, if they made the episode a little longer, but there's really nothing major that they didn't bring up, which is good. And I do think, the writing is pretty witty. It has a lot of good references. Some of the jokes got me quite good. And kind of like what Gamer was saying, I have more genuine appreciation for both of the characters and both of the series that they come from. And Death Battle is really good at getting you interested in different characters. Like, there are so many things that I've started looking more into just because I learned about them, or not even just learn about them, but I got more acquainted with them through Death Battle. So that just shows how good their writing is, that it single-handedly makes people want to learn more about them and actually like either read or watch or play or whatever it is they come from. I think that is really great. Now the outcome. I think this is a good time to talk about the outcome. I don't know. Again, Jolt seems to be the only one who would have a major opinion on the outcome.
One small comment.
Sure.
I remember people were really upset that they brought up Eyes of Heaven as a point of reference of like GER can be countered. And like people were saying, hey, it's not a canon game. Why would you like include it? And I feel like they did not read the black boxes on the top corners, which are like important.
Yeah.
It said that the writer of the original manga was part of the game and directed it. So I feel like if they, in their mind, GER can be countered by something that's universal, they would do that and not lowball it.
I have a bit more to say about that actually, but I will pass the floor to.
Here, that's why.
Okay, so Jolt and I, because I have a bunch of stuff written down too, so it'll probably be a bit of a conversation between me and Jolt then. But Jolt, let's start with you. So conclusion, go.
Yeah, I do agree with the outcome. Like, I do agree that Almighty Attack should just bypass Return to Zero, like regardless, because like it bypasses the Omnipotent Orb, which prevents reality to do whatever it takes to defend the wielder of it.
I do have a couple of questions about that then, because this ties into some of the points that I was saying. Because I personally do agree with the outcome as well. That was the outcome that I predicted in my prediction, unlike Omni-Man versus Bardock. But I do still think they could have explained some things a little better. Specifically what you just said about Return to Zero, they simply just labeled that ability as reality warping, which I know that some people would consider an overgeneralization. Some people might consider that a bit reductive. And while I still think that Joker does have the means to bypass it in some way, whether you're looking at his disconnection to fate, or again, that one persona with the absolute zero attributes and all that, like I still think there are ways for Joker to do it, but I'm not sure if just calling Return to Zero reality warping is incredibly fair, or if it is, I think they should have explained more about the actual mechanism of it, because I always saw it more as you affect the individual and then reality just kind of follows suit, which I thought meant that Joker needed more of a personal resistance, which again, I'm not saying he doesn't have, but I think the way they explained it could have been a little clearer. There was also one thing that I noticed in the conclusion where they were talking about how Maruki could negate actions taken against him, which Joker could not get past, but yet the almighty attacks were still enough to do it. So that makes me think, were the almighty attacks not able to work on Maruki? Did he not have them at the time? Because if he's not able to get past that, that sounds like something that could be in Giorno's favor. But I don't know if you have any answers to any of those questions specifically.
So on the Maruki thing, so there is an ability that he does where he pretty much says no to, so it's a no to a specific like element, so you can't use that element while you're fighting him on for like one whole turn.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, I think it's like he rewrites reality and it's like, okay, you can't use ice moves. If you use ice moves, it gets negated. Or you can't use physical moves. If you use physical moves, it gets negated. You know, that kind of thing. I did try to look it up on because like I can't like play a 100-hour game just to see if Almighty attacks work on it. But according to people on like Reddit and all that, says that like just use a Ketchy or Violet's Almighty skills. Like that should like bypass it because it doesn't count like as an element or anything like that.
Okay, so the angle there is that yes, he can negate actions taken against him, but that definitely would not apply to Almighty. See, this is the kind of thing that I think if I have any kind of major complaints about this episode or Omni-Man versus Bardock, it's that I do think the conclusion needed to be a little more in depth, because what you just said is not even something that was in like one of the black boxes in the corner, but that was definitely a question that I had, and now it seems to make a little more sense. But that sounds like an important point.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like 100% true because I haven't seen it for myself, and I'm like the person that's like I need to see it for myself in order to do it. But
Sure.
like it's from someone that like was asking for Maruki like tips for the boss fight
Right.
on a Reddit post. That
Okay.
I saw because like I saw people bringing that up during like the waiting period, and I was like, is that true? I have to see. And I tried to like look for it, and that was like the best I got.
Okay.
And then the only way for me to actually see it for myself is play a 100-hour game.
Yeah, because that's another thing that some
And it's-
people need to remember, that just because Death Battle doesn't say something doesn't mean they don't know it. It doesn't mean it wasn't part of their internal conclusion or internal reasoning for why they came to a conclusion or came to a verdict. They just try to talk about the stuff that they think is most important. However, like I said, just based on what we just talked about, I do think there are some things that would have been very beneficial. Like, again, for Omni-Man versus Bardock, if they just verbally said the whole thing about Conquest destroying the ship that could withstand its own firepower, I think a lot less people would be mad about Omni-Man winning, as long as they're willing to accept that scaling. Or even for this, again, where Maruki was able to do something very similar to GER, but wait, the details say a little differently. Like, I think these are big things that should be said in the conclusion, especially if you don't know that much about the characters. Like, if all you're getting is what Death Battle is telling you, they need to be thorough within their own reasoning. They can't contradict themselves too much, you know?
Yeah, and I do want to say that I think the Maruki ability and the Return to Zero are like two different, because Return to Zero is like any attack I'm trying to do made on Giorno will return to zero, while Maruki, it's a specific element that he restricts. Like, you cannot use that element for like a whole turn.
And it makes sense to me that an almighty attack is not considered an element, or however it falls under classification in the game. Yeah, no, totally. Thank you for clearing that up, because that was definitely a question that I had.
And as for the Eyes of Heaven things, like I've seen people like argue against that, and it because like Eyes of Heaven wasn't like the deciding factor of winning. It was like the fact that Almighty skills can just bypass Return to Zero. I was supporting evidence, and I saw people say it was not canon, but like again, read the black boxes. Like Araki, the creator of JoJo, had worked on it, and they did the Bardock Super Saiyan, so like I did expect like something like this to happen, but I didn't know for sure because like they didn't do it with Theo or Jonathan.
If you don't mind me interjecting for a second, this is kind of how I see the whole Eyes of Heaven thing. Because there were some people saying, well, why do we use this scaling for Giorno and GER, but we didn't give Dio the world over heaven? Like, isn't that contradictory that, you know, you're using non-canon stuff for one character and not non-canon stuff for the other? There's a difference, though. It's not exactly the same, because using the world over heaven for Dio is just using something that is only found in a non-canon thing. Like, Dio would never get access to that in canon. It doesn't make sense to use that. With GER, though, like, again, especially with the original creator working on it, there's no reason to think that Return to Zero works differently in this non-canon game than it works in canon. So seeing what it can and cannot overcome is, for all intents and purposes, an example of what could happen in canon. Death Battle has done this so many times before, where they look at a character that the way they describe it is that it's the same character going through different events. And that makes sense to me, that yes, even if this thing happened in a non-canon thing, it's still an example of what the powers are able to do. The actual abilities in and of themselves, they work canonically the same, you know?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. Like, I think people saw like Eyes of Heaven like as a Archie Sonic, Game Sonic kind of thing, where it's like it's just two separate characters.
But no,
like, Eyes of Heaven is really just a Marvel What If thing, where it's like it's the same character, they're just in this like different scenario, like this different what if.
Because if it was like a power source or something that was only found in that one game that canonically Giorno would never have access to, then yes, like that's not something you can use. But if it's the same character with the same abilities, then it's fine. Like, I don't see what the big deal is. It seems like anything that's non-canon, you can't use. But as long as some aspects are canon, then yeah, like, the context is necessary. But in this case, I do think it works.
Yeah, it's so pretty much Eyes of Heaven is still canon. Giorno is just like something that's like messing with time. Yeah. To like now, the original story was just altered, and now canon Giorno is like in this whole different story. Pretty much.
Right, and the only other thing I would kind of complain about with the analyses, or at least something, again, that I would want them to explain a little more, is the whole infinite death loop. Because something I noticed is that in one of the black boxes, they actually said that death is not a prerequisite for the infinite death loop to work, because it's officially described as anyone that is struck by GER will have their death reverted to 0. But that still doesn't make sense to me, because the word reverted is in there. You can't revert someone's death to 0 if it never reached that point in the first place. So that to me, like, and again, this was something I brought up in my prediction where I was like, I know that it's officially described as this, but the word reverted, I feel like, kind of implies something. So I don't know, maybe Death Battle came to that conclusion using a different methodology, and if so, I would really like to hear what that was. But if it really is just based on that one official sentence, then I don't agree with that, because reverted means something more than just it happens, you know? I don't know, that's just kind of how I see it. Maybe someone in the comments can explain that if they do think that infinite death loop can just happen if GER lands one hit on you or something, but the way I see it, I don't really think that's how it works.
The problem with GER is like we've seen it like once, and it's like very vague, and so like nobody really truly understands how it like really works. Like there's even arguments against it having infinite speed, and that Joker should just bypass it because he has like infinite immeasurable arguments, given that he can just like move through like time being frozen and all that.
There is definitely other stuff you can talk about, but as much as I kind of am just clowning on Death Battle for not talking enough like in depth, I do think they generally try to prioritize trying to make things sound as easy to understand, especially for people who maybe don't know the characters as well, and I definitely appreciate that, but I do think there are instances where more context is necessary, and necessary to be spoken aloud, because not everyone will pick up on it otherwise. But yeah, the toxicity for this matchup, again, you know, I'm seeing a ton of people disagree with it. The amount of people who are like unwilling to change their minds under any circumstances is honestly a bit sickening, because this is something that I posted on my Blue Sky, and I kind of want to reiterate it here, that I am a very firm believer that if you are a Death Battle fan, you need to at least be open to the idea of having your mind changed. This doesn't mean that you have to agree with Death Battle every time, because Death Battle's word is not law, but you have to remember that your word is also not law. Just because you feel a certain way, that doesn't automatically override what Death Battle is saying. It doesn't override what someone else is saying. Like, ultimately, these are just a bunch of different opinions. And if you're not willing to accept the idea that Death Battle could know something that you don't, why are you watching the analyses? Why are you even entertaining what they have to say? What, are you just checking to see if they're quote-unquote right? What if you're wrong? It's possible that you could be wrong. Like, again, you don't have to agree with Death Battle all the time. You definitely don't. But you need to at least go into it thinking, hey, I might learn something new. You at least have to do that, because otherwise there's no point in watching the analyses. There's no point in doing any of that.
Yeah. I think what a lot of people forget a good majority of the time is that Death Battle and power scaling in of its entirety is subjective.
Absolutely.
There is no definitive way to scale a character's power. There is no definitive answer to if one character would be another, unless, you know, it actually becomes a canon thing, but that's rarely ever the case.
Or unless we pull them out of the pages of the comic book or whatever and make them fight in reality, which you can't do, right? Like, yeah, and there's some techniques that are better to use than others, like, I'm not going to deny that, but yeah, like, to say that there's an undeniable answer, and especially to say, oh yes, and I'm always right, I always have all the undeniable answers, like, who the fuck do you think you are? Like,
I feel like a lot of people don't understand that, versus debating is all subjective. Like, a lot of stuff can be left up to interpretation, where Bardock versus Omni-Man, a lot of people, like, didn't look the sun defeat that closely, but Death Battle decided, hey, maybe this feat is really important, and that contributed to Omni-Man's strength and durability.
Yeah, exactly. This is something I said earlier, that if Death Battle brings up something that the general community didn't really think about before, then people are more so to just think that it's wrong. because, oh, if no one has brought it up before, then there must be something wrong with it. But again, it's always possible for Death Battle to know something that other people don't. And that doesn't mean that it has less of a leg to stand on. Maybe you should actually read the comics, play the games. Maybe you should do the research for yourself instead of just basing your quote-unquote infallible opinion over stuff that you've heard from other people. Like, who does that? Yeah. Apparently everyone does that. I see it all the time, and it drives me up the wall.
Also, like, matchups, like, change outcomes, like, all the time because something new happens. Yeah. Like, matchups, like, Sackboy versus Maxwell. Even, like, the Persona matchup, like, Kira used to beat Adachi until people, like, found more, like, multiversal Adachi stuff, and then it's like, oh yeah, dude, he solos Kira.
Yeah, like I don't think it's a good idea to get too hung up on these conclusions or anything, because just let it go. It's an internet show. Watch it to have fun, and watch it prepared to learn something new. And again, if you disagree with what Death Battle has to say and you genuinely believe that you have better arguments than they do, that's great. Use those arguments, believe what you want to believe, but I am always going to be more willing to believe what Death Battle has to say than some random guy on the internet who's just repeating things that he has heard, because at least Death Battle, the argument that they are biased, I don't think works. Even if you can poke holes in their conclusion, they believe what they are saying. They definitely believe in their own arguments. They've come to a conclusion that they think is fair, and I'm always going to be more on the side of that, unless I have my own arguments that I think are better, or unless I see arguments that I think are better. I'm always going to be more on the side of Death Battle than just someone saying, no, Giorno should have won, he has Deus Ex Machina bullshit. Like, I'm not really inclined to agree with you if that's all you're telling me.
Yeah. Also, back on the Joker Giorno thing, I also saw, like, the power of friendship being outside help things. The social links are not outside help. They're like they're just
something they have.
Hanging out with it's a passive hanging out with his friends. His bonds with his friends is what fuels his power pretty much.
There are some people who seem to think that anything that comes from anything that is not the combatant personally is outside help, but there's a reason why they call it outside help and not, like, just generally help. Like, inside help, which is what I personally like to call it, is included, and that's something where, realistically, why would they not have it? You know what I mean? Like, are you trying to say that Joker shouldn't use any of his personas because they're not literally him? Like, no, that's a great example of inside help because it's something that Joker has access to all the time. And the power of friendship works very similarly, because why would he not have access to that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, outside help is just like, oh, his friend is coming in
to
help beat him up.
Or it's like Crash can't get access to Aku Aku, even though he can literally call Aku Aku whenever he wants. Like, that's not outside help. That's not from the outside. So
it's still inside the Coliseum.
I swear to God, this episode has now just become me talking about my least favorite things about this community. But yeah, I think that's where we're going to wrap things up. Thank you guys so much for being on the show. I think this was a great talking about both of the episodes. I'm happy you guys enjoyed them to the extent that you did. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to give it a like, comment your comments about anything that we've talked about down below, and subscribe if you could too. That'd be amazing if you want to see more stuff like this. But either way, thank you so much for watching. Any final words from anyone?
Make Cocaine Bear versus Meth Gator happen, y'all. Let's do it.
Episode number 4.
Save me.
God. And after all, you're my wonderwall.
All those little people down there.
Good night, everybody. See you later.
I had to.